This is Speaks Her Truth, and I'm here with our guest host today. Hey, we got Lauren in the building. Hey, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. So, you guys, Atlantis couldn't be with us today, but she wanted me to send her love and let you guys know that she misses you guys and she cannot wait and for the last episode, which is our next episode, which is it's crazy that the season is already coming to an end. It's insane. But Atlantis sends her love, and she'll be back for the next episode. But we are so glad to have Lauren with us today. Hey.
Yay. I'm excited.
Okay, so the topic for this podcast is mistrust of HR within our community. So, as you guys know, I like to do a little bit of a kind of a breakdown to kind of get the conversation started. And then from there, I got a few questions for Lauren here. She is our SME today, who's going to kind of help us break down this kind of this relationship between employees and HR. So let me go ahead and get us kicked off in my cynical way, because that's, y'all know me, that's how I do. So let's go ahead and start off with what is the purpose of HR, right? So I've done a little bit of research to make sure I got this one right, y'all. So basically, the responsibilities of human resources fall into really three major categories: staffing, employee compensation and benefits, and defining and designing work. So essentially, the purpose is to maximize the productivity of the organization by optimizing the effectiveness of its employees. So another definition that I found, and this was by Human Resources MBA, is that the responsibilities are listed as follows. So staffing needs, compensation, benefits, performance appraisal, and law compliance, right? So no one should be surprised by that. Pretty spot on with what you think of when you think of HR. But what to me becomes very unclear in that definition is, who does HR serve, right? Like, is it the employees or is it the company? So I did a Google search, and you guys can too, on this concept of, mistrust of HR. And you'll get like pages of articles written by like Forbes magazine, Forbes, to blogs and Reddit threads. And there's enough publications there to quantify that it is in fact a problem that not just Black women have with HR, but just really employees in general in HR. There's a disconnect between that relationship. And so there was actually a survey conducted in 2018, which found that 70% of employees at the top 4 most valuable companies said they did not trust their HR department. So those 4 companies were Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, so that survey was in 2018, but right in 2021, those are still 4 top most valuable, right, companies. So I asked the question, earlier around who does HR serve and what are their responsibilities? So let's break that down piece by piece and talk about how Black women compare to each of those areas. So just to remind everyone, a level set, again, HR is responsible for staffing needs, compensation, benefits, performance appraisal, and law compliance, right? Okay, because it's my favorite thing to do, right? Let's go staffing first. One of the facts that we brought up multiple times in this podcast is that there's only currently one Black woman CEO in the Fortune 500 company, right? There's one right now, and the first Black woman, to ever make it to that status. I think most Black women, we know Ursula, right? Like we think we know Ursula.
Yeah.
But basically, when she stepped down, she officially went on air and said that not to just Black women, but to people in general, like in order to get where she got, HR, she made it very clear, HR is not going to help you get there. And really, something that's also been really interesting since the pandemic is that the most laid off person in the pandemic is a Hispanic woman, and then followed by Black women. So that's staffing, right? Now let's talk about compensation. So Latinas and Black women are much more likely than white women and men to have hourly jobs. And among those employees with hourly jobs, Latinas and Black women are 2.5 times as likely as white men to make less than $15 an hour, which is wild. Like, how are you even surviving, yo? Um, okay, so let's talk about the appraisal process for Black women. So for every 100 men promoted to manager, only 58 Black women are promoted, despite the fact that Black women ask for promotions at the same rate as men. And for every 100 men hired into a manager role, only like 64% of women are actually hired. So this means that there are fewer Black women to promote at every subsequent level, and the representation gap just keeps getting wider, right? All right. So I'm gonna wrap this up real quick because I really want to get into the conversation. But to me, Lauren, when I asked the question earlier, who does HR serve? To me, the answer is not Black women. That's my answer. But right, we got you here. You're our guest host, and I really want to kind of get your perspective on this. So so as I shared earlier, so Lauren is here with us today as a guest host. She is in HR today. And I have a few questions for you, Lauren. And my first question for you is I am really curious on like what was your journey or your decision to wanting to start your career in HR? Like what drove you to that career path?
Yeah. So I actually started my career in social work, and social work and HR sometimes share this feeling of not feeling appreciated or having a lot of behind the scenes type of work. It's a very thankless job, that you have to make critical decisions depending on who you're trying to support. And sometimes, as a social worker, you have to make critical decisions for the child that you're servicing, or it could be an adult in need. Um, Similar to HR, you're servicing your enterprise, the company's best interests. And so, kind of even a little bit, probably answering a little bit of your question about, who does HR serve to is the enterprise, right? The company, whoever we're supporting. But in order to support the company, you have to do that also through people. And so, I started my journey into HR of wanting to support people in a different fashion. Being in social work was really draining emotionally.
Yeah.
And I knew for my own sake that I needed a different profession where I felt like I could still create value, but I could have better boundaries for my own mental health, for my own personal. And so that's what first drove me into HR. And then as I got into HR, I realized that there are many functions or many components to HR that I had no idea was considered actually like employee or human resource driven. I've done different roles in recruiting and staffing, employee relations, investigations, HR business partners, which in those HR business partners, or I've even done like a project consultant role or like a generalist is sometimes what other companies call it. You kind of touch on a lot. I would like to say like a jack of many trades, such as compensation, benefits, retirement, data analytics. I mean, all of those niche subject matter expert roles fall into this major umbrella of human resource.
It's like the police.
It's weird because I think, there's only really one area that serves as if we want to call it like the police. But, when people are fearful of HR or there's mistrust, do you feel mistrust with your recruiter? Do you feel mistrust with the person who generates your salary? Is it
Right.
policies? And so I think we have to get to the root of where is the mistrust when it comes to HR. And then some of it you may not change your opinion at the end of this, but at least my goal is by sharing my knowledge or my experience that at least you can understand. It might not change how you feel, but maybe you can leave here with a better understanding of human resource.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fair. So my question for you, right? Like talking about intersectionality is really important to me. So you're not just an HR representative, like you're a Black woman first. And so I'm really curious on like you being a Black woman in HR, like how does that shape how you get work done?
Yeah. Um, It shapes how I get work done on the way that I want to be engaged with, how often, how I want to be communicated with, and how often I want to be involved in when it comes to a sense of visibility. So when I'm working on sensitive matters or I'm bringing my ideas from a human resource perspective, I still have to be mindful of this is a Black woman wanting to change a culture at an organization that for a lot of these, and especially the Fortune 300, 200, 500, et cetera, we're talking about changing a white men or white men driven culture, right? And that really, without the EEOC, we can't trust that people are going to do the right thing because people are biased. And so you have to learn to navigate that in the right way from a way of professionalism, but I can still get my job done. So it can impact how I communicate to leaders, how I communicate with the business or my customers or my clients. It also impacts how much visibility means to me, right? I want to make sure that my efforts are being seen, but I also know that I represent more than just myself. Women of color, specifically Black women, or just those who might have a different diverse background. My failures and my mistakes can cause a bias for someone else to consider whether or not they find us to be competitive or fit for these roles.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of I think a lot of Black women can relate to that. I mean, I definitely can. I think you probably have more pressure than most being in HR because of the sensitivity of the role, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but yeah, no, I definitely hear you. Okay, Lauren, so I'm gonna go here with the question that I have been curious about for a long time, and I think a lot of a lot of others have been here. So I'm gonna talk about a personal situation first. I'm just curious if you've been in a similar situation. So I have been in a situation where like I was I was actually kind of like beefing with a person in HR, right? And so this all kind of ties into like that investigation process. And for me at that time, it felt like, it was going to be the end of my career where I worked, right? Because like HR is like the people that you go to when you're having a problem, but like what happens when the person you have a problem with is in HR? And for me, it was like one of the craziest and kind of scariest times for me because, I'm like, dang, do I need to go look for another place to work now? And I'm curious, like, have you ever been in a situation like that, being in HR?
Yeah. First, it's never a good day when that happens, right? And we're all human and it can be very uncomfortable. I had a situation back in maybe like 2 years now where I had a issue, almost like a verbal altercation with my supervisor, who's also HR. And it was the first time where I also had to make my own report in meeting that specific team in HR, the employee relations or investigations team. Some companies combine the names, sometimes they're different names, but it's all the same area that does a lot of the same work. Um, where I had to go to them about my supervisor. But for a lot of companies, when it is for me, like when it's HR, having issues with HR, there is someone that's supposed to oversee HR for HR situations. Or if you had a concern or issue with someone in HR, there's supposed to be someone that only oversees that type of work because of the level of bias or conflict of interest that can happen, right? That person can't navigate that concern since they're implicated. And so you need that third party to be able to evaluate that. Certain companies, they'll go external. They'll get an external investigation company to come and do an independent report about what has occurred. If it's to a level that's systemic, or maybe it's executive leaders are involved, even though a company might have internal HR, sometimes it is nice getting that external perspective just to make sure that it's the process that we're following for investigations working. Are we having a non-biased process for both the employee and for the HR representative?
Right, that makes sense. Damn, I wish anyways, I'm like, damn, where was the external? Going through my issue. But so Lauren, I'm reading a book right now, and it's called Dents in the Ceiling by Angel Henry. So all your listeners out there, check that book out. It's pretty good. And in the book, she references, is interesting, as I was preparing for this to meet with you, in the book, she references like an issue she had with her supervisor at the time, and she's giving advice to other Black women. And in the book, she says like having an HR, having like a HR friend is really important outside your company. And she specifically like tells Black women in the book that like if you are having an issue, you should reach out to HR outside of your company to handle the discrepancies that you're experiencing. And as I read that, I was like, dang, I can't wait to ask Lauren like what are her thoughts, right? Because like I said, that conversation, that what I said earlier around like intersectionality, right? Like you being a Black woman, and being in the ranks of HR, having many different experiences specifically for that investigation process. Like, do you agree with Angel's comment around Black women seeking HR, but just outside of their company?
I think to an extent, I would say the same way as you would for if you needed legal advice, maybe going to someone that is a lawyer or family or a friend that's a lawyer outside of your company to get that non-biased, outside perspective about what's going on. I think it's almost kind of to that last point of that external investigator, coming in to give you a non-biased perspective. I think the only reason why I don't 100% agree is if you came to me and asked me about a concern, I can tell you based off of my experience and my thoughts, but I'm not familiar with your company's culture or what their policies are or what their procedures are. So I can only tell you based off what you're telling me. And that's the same way from an HR standpoint, right? I'll hear a concern from an employee, but it's their reality, it's their perspective of a concern. And then you have to take that and compare it to what we expect to happen by our policies or by our bylaws or by your company's value. So much like some of the data that you shared earlier about like Google and the top companies, when they started, people aspects were not a priority, right? Like their focus is maintaining technology and advancement for the continued future, whatever that may look like. And so I would say for every company or whatever company you work with, what is, I guess, who are they at their root, right? And
Yes.
I think that's going to be their focus. And for a lot of these companies, these aren't people driven companies. And so when you're thinking about the mistrust for HR, it could be that you have a HR team that's not supported. And I mean, supported from development. These folks still need to be trained. They need to have career development opportunities to continue to exercise that muscle of how to engage in critical conversations with people. And if you have an area of your company that's not investing enough money or time into HR, then you're going to have poor people navigating really sensitive situations that you're going to leave that interaction with the HR with an impression. No matter if it's good or bad, you're going to leave that experience, whether you trust HR or you don't. And that's just unfortunate. And it's something that really belongs to the company for how the company views HR. So if Google has 10,000 employees, but only 50 are HR to service 10,000 people, are we sure that their HR function is staffed enough to support that many people?
Right.
And if I'm one person servicing an entire country, do I have the time and capacity to maybe give a little bit more care or time or sensitivity support to your concern? Or is it that I need to be focused on SLAs of I have to get these cases closed out by 30 days or I'm in trouble? And when you're so focused on data and metrics, you could lose out on that human experience that, you know what, maybe I do need to speak to Lauren 2 more times because Lauren would benefit from having more touch points with me. But I'm worried about my job. So I'm going to give Lauren fast advice and move on. And now Lauren doesn't feel like HR cared. Lauren doesn't feel like she has a path to move forward. So now Lauren's probably not going to come back to HR again for advice or for assistance because the first time she did try, it wasn't successful.
Yeah, Lauren, I think you really hit it on the head there. Something that like just Atlantis and I have been talking about in our spare time is this concept of like as Black women, we really we really need to think about where we place our capital, right? And I really think you just hit that on the head there. Like we got to stop giving our energy to places where we're not wanted. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We've got to find, you know what I'm saying? Like we got to do our due diligence to find these, find the right places, right? That have HR reps, right? That give, like, you know what I'm saying? That are being poured
Yeah.
into so that way they can care, right? But no, but I think that's really spot on. I mean, I get
I can
really
tell
great
you,
insight.
I had a recent situation with another Black woman, and she potentially had lied about something to the extent of even lying and altering documentation. And when I had to interview her, I spent the time of wanting to get to know her as a person before just, did you do this? And it builds that relationship. It also eases the tension because no one likes getting the random email or call that, you need to come down to the principal's office, right? Or if for a lot of us, or like the stereotypes with Black moms or Latina moms, when they call your name, it's not a good thing, right? With that tone
Right.
on it. And so I wanted to make sure that one, she felt comfortable in an uncomfortable situation. And sometimes it could feel like you can't have that in HR. And my belief is that at the end of the day, you should leave this feeling valued, heard, and respected, even if you don't agree with the outcome, because it's not my perspective or my opinion on the outcome. It's based off of what the company's expectation is. So if you feel that, oh, HR isn't forgiving, or we're misunderstanding, or we're not understanding or empathetic, it's most likely your company's expectation, their values, or the policies that they don't have room for it, right? And it's our role to appear that at the same time. And so when I was working with her in that first interview, I could tell that I wasn't getting the answers to my questions. Other investigator on my team probably would have fired her after that first interaction. I interviewed her 4 times. I had 4 interactions with her over a course of 2.5 weeks. Am I obligated to do that? No. Could I have made a decision without her input? Yes, because I tried. I gave her an opportunity to be honest with me, to give me her side of the story, but she was fearful. One, she didn't know she could trust the process. Two, she's never been through the process before. Three, she knew at the time that she had messed up. And for a lot of people, they're like, well, if you admit, does that give you a mitigator to not being fired? Or should you just go down with the ship sailing? Right. Um, by the fourth interaction, I finally got the truth. I understood what happened, but I didn't understand why.
Right.
And on that fourth one, she poured her heart out to a lot of other things that she was struggling with before getting here, of having a poor supervisor who didn't set her up for success, who didn't set time with her, didn't value her. Then her brand was changing. Then she was finding herself in conflict with peers, felt like people were talking about her. And she came to this place of severe anxiety and depression of, I have to be perfect so my white colleagues don't think I'm here because I'm a diversity hire. And because she was so filled with anxiety, when it came to a point to, to do the right thing, and doing the right thing for her would have been another data point to her supervisor that she's not doing a good job. So she lied about it. Now, ultimately, you're going to have a hard time finding any company that's going to accept you if you lie or you alter documentation. So her admitting to that didn't change the outcome, but we spent an additional hour where I spoke to her about, we need to talk about what you did here so that you're not here again. I wish you would have had the confidence or the trust just to ask someone else what to do. And sometimes when you're in those traumatic experiences, you're so paralyzed by fear that you just try to figure it out on your own instead of giving the opportunity for someone else to give you some piece of advice. If she would have told me earlier, like, when she was having those anxiety or that her supervisor didn't set her up, right? If that was 6 months ago, we could have tried an intervention. You won't believe how many poor supervisors there are, right? Because sometimes a lot of companies, we promote people based off of technical knowledge, not because they're good supervisors.
Right.
She could still need coaching or training, and her supervisor could still be piss poor, and we need to address him or her at the same time, right? I might not be able to tell that to you because of conflict of interest, but X, Y, and Z, but she never allowed anyone to help her. And we missed the opportunity to have saved her in our organization. And that's what bothers me. And it bothers me more because she's also a woman of color, specifically a Black woman that we lost. We didn't have to lose. And I hated that she got to that point. But at the end, she completely understood the resolution, the outcome. She was so appreciative, and she wished that other people knew that there were people in HR that would have cared as much as I did with her. And that even when she left and she's now with another company, we still are in contact, mostly on LinkedIn, but we talk from time to time. And much of probably what is referenced in your book, I'm sure she would probably bring things to me to get my perspective, because I'm the first person in her journey in her career to have someone in HR that cared enough.
Right.
And I think the key here is that I'm willing to do it. Not everyone would do that. And I don't think it's a race thing. I think it's a capacity. It's a, do they care enough to do that? Right? Not that they don't care, but just, do they want to spend the time putting in that extra work to enhance your experience when it's not required, right? Like, no one is requiring us to spend this amount of TLC, but I choose to do it anyway, especially for people of color.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said it's not a race thing, because yeah, I don't know, because
Well, let me clarify. I don't
yeah.
think, I see that for some of my colleagues, they'll fire anyone no matter what the race is. But from a behavior of intentionality, of getting to the truth, of understanding the why, right? Good people make mistakes every day. If I just tell you don't do that again, and we haven't uncovered what's leading you to do that, you're going to be back here again. But did I do my job by giving you the feedback not to do it again? Yes. And that's what I'm saying, like, from a race thing, is that that's like the minimum, or that's just like the expectation. But I think what could be better for the mistrust of HR is the, let me better understand your perspective. I want to spend more time with you. I want to understand why you perceived it this way. I want to understand what behaviors are motivating this. And I think sometimes we have to be so careful in our roles as HR that we are still people too. And I know what my biases are. I have a bias with having a lack of empathy for Asians or Asian Americans because of my stereotype of my journey of being a Black woman is worse than your journey. And that's not a right way to think. And I know that. And I've had to correct that bias because that was the bias for which was raised in my household. Right. And so if I don't spend that time exercising my muscle to not be biased, when I get a case or a situation for someone who does identify as Asian, or if I'm biased and I assume they're Asian, and they're telling me their problems, and I don't think they're relevant problems, and I think that you're a slacker, right? That's going to develop that data point for mistrust in HR. No matter, even though I did my job, right? Like, I think that's what I'm trying to get to, is that people are doing their job, but could they be doing their job better? And I do think when you're dealing with people of color or young professionals, I think that extra care goes so much further because of the unique journeys that we go through because of our dimension of differences.
Yeah, that makes sense. It almost feels like cultural trainings have got to be part of
Yeah,
like the invest like in order right? Like it feels like a prereq to be able to handle investigations. Like you have to understand like cultural
yeah.
differences.
I'll tell you, me and one of my other colleagues, we created we had to change the name because it was too direct, but we were developing a white privilege training for our investigators because we wanted to discuss that there is privilege that can come across in our employee situations. And if you can't identify that privilege, it can have an impact to one person versus the other. And the way we kind of framed it is that privilege is a consequence to unconscious bias when it's not addressed. And
Mm,
we use blinded examples or scenarios, some based off of real situations, some we just added in some fabrication to really get to the root of what we're talking about.
right.
So things that come up all the time are the salary, which is a component that I know you mentioned as well, right? So, let's say you're hired as a Latina new hire, and I'm hired as a white female. Um, and it's our performance appraisal. And they're saying that, well, you come off as brash, hard to work with, and no one wants to interact with you because maybe you speak up a lot in meetings and you're very opinionated. I, as the white woman, do the same thing, but on my appraisal note, they believe that my behaviors are more coachable than yours.
Mm,
What makes them more coachable when they're the same behaviors? And that's where that bias can come in from that privilege that, from a white woman perspective, a lot of the same behaviors that they can display as a Latina or a Black woman, they're easily forgiven. They're not seen as to be as bad as if we were to do it,
right.
right? But if we're not checking that when we're seeing these concerns, because on paper it's like, okay, well, if you don't think, Lauren's behaviors are bad, then so be it. But I need to spend that extra time to ask you, I need you to define to me why this is. You
Right.
should have put examples with feedback, etc. And if people aren't doing that checks and balances, you're going to have those mistrust and comms, investigations, and everywhere else, even though your supervisor has a hand in that too. But HR is almost like the security guard before you get in, right? Like, we should be checking everyone to make sure, like, you're padded, that nobody's carrying anything.
Yeah, so actually, I'm glad you brought up that piece about compensation. So August 3rd was National Black Women's Equal Pay Day, right? And we
Yep.
saw it like all over social media. So one question I have for you, and I really want to get your opinion, Lauren, is like, is there a way for like, or do you have a recommendation for like Black women, like if we wanted to go to HR and ask, like, are we being paid at the same rate? Like, is there a way that we as Black women can do that without getting our managers involved?
Yeah. So I think it's all in how you phrase the question,
Okay.
and also trying to figure out what you're trying to see and what you're trying to get to, right? I think when you give that type of topic or question generally to HR, they're going to give you a pretty standard answer that salaries are based off of the market and then based off of your experience. It's not when you first come in, unless someone's just being very biased and they're just, not giving you a competitive offer. It's over time that you see the gap between gender or race, that somehow Lauren's annual salary evaluation just hasn't progressed at the rate as Bob, right? Is it that Lauren's on a very competitive team and I'm just not meeting the expectation? Or is it that out of sight, out of mind? Is it that you're not, communicating that financial advancement is important to you? And I think that goes a long way. When I'm mentoring new hires or interns, I said, you need to make it very clear what matters to you. You need to do it in a professional way. I talk about my pressures and responsibilities of I'm a homeowner, I have a wedding to save for, I'm trying to, pay off student loans. So when it comes to performance evaluation, I want all the money on the table. I need you to know that raises are important to me because you could be not getting a raise, not because you're being racially discriminated, but because your manager doesn't think it's something that you would find meaningful as a form of motivation or recognition. And a reason why that happens a lot for us as women of color is because we tend to be so overly gracious and thankful for just having the opportunity that it can come across as you are very content and happy. And I know that should not influence your manager to not give you a raise one way or the other, but you have to keep in mind that your manager is still human and biased. You have to play to people's biases. And so a lot of things I talk about with my new hires and mentors is it's 6 months, let's say it's July. I know we're a little in August. I want to know what hesitations do you have now before December about me getting promoted? Or what hesitations do you have now about me getting the top raise? So that way I can use this next 5-6 months in order to do that. And the reason I phrase it that way, because if you're going to come to HR and say that you think that you're not being competitively paid, the first thing they're going to ask you is why? What is this based off of? Because when you think about salaries, they are sensitive. That is HR sensitive data. So we can't just tell you, well, yeah, you're actually making more than Lauren on the team. We have to have an understanding, like, what are we trying to look at? But normal companies, they do and are legally obligated to pay you market rate. So you will see sometimes where you are forced to get a market adjustment because legally they have to. But I think it's that period where you are getting or not getting raises that's the bias that we have to answer as a society, as a company, as HR, as to how come people of color tend to drift off. And we see that in recruiting. A recruiter can bring you a diverse candidate slate, but somehow they fall off, whether it's after the phone screen, first interview, panel interview, but we still hire a white woman or white male. But what made them drop off? And it's probably either we're not finding competitive diverse candidates, which I argue against. I think it's bias, right? And it's how we communicate and advocate for ourselves in the moment. So I think it's the why. So I think if you can get the why of why you feel or why you want to understand, that's going to better influence HR to be able to give you the most relevant information as to why your salary might not be in a competitive range to your peers.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. All right, so we're coming up on time here, Lawrence.
Okay.
So I just want you to be able to kind of share. So what piece of advice do you give to Black women listening to this podcast on like how they should interact with HR and yeah, just want you to drop some gems for us
Yeah.
as we give it a close.
First, I always say if your company has a way to report anonymously, do that. Whether it's through an online form or through a call, do that. And the reason being is get the initial reaction or impression that you're getting from your HR department at your company, right? Now, they're not going to be able to go into the weeds because you're anonymous, right? So obviously you're holding back some information for your own protection, but they can at least give you high level based off of what you're willing to share. And I think that'll give you a good impression of the type of HR person you're working with or a reaction for your HR philosophy or how HR operates at your company. A second piece that I would recommend is understanding your personal situation. Come with facts, come with documentation, come with dates, come with everything that you possibly can have that separates this from a feeling to this is a real concern. Because HR will hear your feelings. Sometimes it can almost feel like we're therapists, but we can't act on feelings. We have to be able to act on facts. But I will tell you, there are times where it can feel like, and probably will be times where it's he say, she say. And what HR is going to be looking for, who is the most credible. And that's where people tend to have the most tension and where bias can be, is how are we defining who tends to be the most credible. I definitely agree about finding you an HR friend, having someone that, hey, I want to run this by you, kind of get your quick thoughts. Is this something that I should report? Is this something that I should try to work on my own, or how to do that? I'll tell you, I've had people call me who are very uncomfortable. I said, well, give me everything, and then I'll tell you what I would do. And I think, and this goes based off of, again, your company. So you need to figure out what your company HR process looks like. But for mine, not all concerns warrant an investigation. You can come and tell me that you're having a problem with your supervisor. Unless your supervisor is physically or verbally abusing you, assaulting you, there's drugs or some type of violence, alcohol, or you're not threatening to hurt yourself, I'm not obligated to do an investigation. Those are things that we are legally obligated to report. So when you're telling me that your supervisor is being mean to you, you feel like you're not getting sufficient raises, you feel like you're not being heard, or that you're being potentially discriminated against, I'm going to tell you what I would want to do as an HR investigator. And you could tell me, no, I don't feel comfortable. Because if you have to go and speak to my manager, I don't want that. I don't want them to know. Okay, I can understand that. So let's talk about what we can do in the situation without involving your manager. But I do warn that you might still feel or experience these events. So you'll have to own that piece, because I can't have the process in the way that I need to have the process. And then thirdly, be open-minded. We're all human. We can all own a piece of our own problems for how maybe we didn't operate in the best way. If you were called a racial slur and you cussed that person out, now that racial slur was inappropriate, 100,000%. Should you have cussed that person out at work? No. So don't yell at me when I tell you that you should not have done that. That's just, it is what it is. We all own a piece. But I would definitely, just double tap on knowing or getting familiar with your company's HR framework, how they operate, so you know who you're dealing with. And ultimately, if you're working for a company that does not value HR, or that is not trained, or you feel like they're competent to handle your concerns, that is an issue with that company. And there's not going to be much you can do to influence that, but you will have to figure out how you would navigate your people issues without them, or if that's not the right company for you. So evaluate their values, do some anonymous hotlines. I mean, I reported one of my past supervisors on the hotline every week 2 years ago.
Not every week.
Every week I was reporting that person because I was fearful, because they were a leader in HR and I didn't feel comfortable. So I was putting it in, and like they were like, oh yeah, wow, there's a lot going on. You won't believe how many people could have a concern for the same person and you just don't know it. So even if you just wanted to submit that this person is a horrific leader and here are 4 reasons why, and I don't want to go through investigation process, you might be the 5th person to report that. And now I have a trend to go off of, and you didn't even have to identify yourself. So always, always, always report, because your report could help someone else who also felt uncomfortable stepping up and identifying. But if you're ready to quit, I just feel like, what do you have to lose? You might as well just lay it all out there.
Yeah, I hear you. All right. Well, You guys heard it directly from Lauren. Thanks, Lauren. I think you gave us get me included. You gave us all a lot to think about, and I really value just your insight. So thank you for co-hosting with me today and joining me. Thank you for being here. So as you guys know, we've got one more episode left, and this is kind of our oh man, our farewell of season one. That's wild. But anyways, we love you guys. We've got one more. So not this Thursday, not this next coming Thursday, but the following Thursday, Atlantis will be back and we'll be dropping that last episode. So all right, ladies, the dark room is officially in use. Enjoy yourself. See ya.